Commander Zexthal stared at the glowing reports on his command table. The data streams showed another primitive world spinning through space near a yellow star. The third planet from the sun looked blue and green, covered in water and land masses. Intelligence reports called the species living there humans. He had done this 847 times before. Each time was the same. Find a new world, study the natives, make contact, and give them a simple choice. Join the Valorian Empire peacefully or be conquered by force. Most species chose to join. The smart ones always did. Lieutenant Commander Veltar approached the command table. His scales were bright purple, showing excitement. Young officers always got excited before their first conquest. Zexthal remembered feeling that way centuries ago, before routine had set in. "Sir, the human analysis is complete," Veltar said, placing a data crystal on the table. "They are quite primitive. Chemical rockets for space travel. Basic energy. Weapons. Their most advanced ships barely leave their home system." Zexthal activated the crystal and watched the data flow across his screens. The humans had divided their world into separate nations that fought each other constantly. Their technology was thousands of years behind Valorian science. Their weapons were crude and inefficient. Their ships were slow and vulnerable. "What is their population?" Zexthal asked. "Approximately 8 billion individuals across their home world and a few small colonies," Veltar replied. "They have established basic settlements on their moon and the fourth planet, but nothing significant." Zexthal nodded. 8 billion was a large population, but size meant nothing when facing superior technology. The Valorians had conquered worlds with 50 billion inhabitants. Numbers only mattered if you had the weapons to use them effectively. Their military structure? Zexthal continued. "Fragmented and chaotic, sir. They have no unified command. Each nation maintains separate forces. They spend more time fighting each other than developing their technology. Most of their weapons are designed for conflicts against other humans, not space-based threats." This was typical. Most primitive species focused on local conflicts rather than preparing for contact with galactic civilizations. It made conquest easier, but also more predictable. Zexthal sometimes missed the challenge of facing a truly prepared enemy. "Begin standard first contact protocols," Zexthal ordered. "Send a diplomatic vessel to establish communication. Offer them the usual terms." The Valorian Empire had perfected first contact over millennia. A single ship would approach the primitive world, demonstrate superior technology, and deliver a simple message. Join the Empire and receive protection, technology, and prosperity. Refuse and face the consequences. Most species needed only a small demonstration of Valorian power to make the right choice. 3 days later, Captain Jake Morrison of the Human vessel New Horizon made first contact during a routine patrol near the Human's largest gas giant. The meeting took place in space, far from the human home world. Zexthal watched the communication from his command ship, studying the Human's reactions. Morrison was a typical primitive commander. He wore a simple uniform and spoke in basic terms. His ship was tiny compared to even the smallest Valorian vessel. When the diplomatic ship demonstrated its shield technology by absorbing the Human's most powerful weapons without damage, Morrison seemed appropriately impressed. "I represent the Valorian Empire," the diplomatic officer explained to Morrison. "We offer your species membership in our civilization. You will receive advanced technology, protection from hostile forces, and access to thousands of worlds. In return, you will acknowledge Valorian authority and contribute to our mutual prosperity." Morrison listened carefully. His face showed the usual mix of fear and wonder that primitive species displayed when first encountering advanced technology. But then he asked a question that made Zexthal pause. "You said you've done this before. How many times?" 847 successful integrations. The diplomatic officer replied proudly. Morrison was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. The fear was gone, replaced by something harder to identify. 847. That's a lot of worlds. Tell me, how many of those species are still around? I mean, still existing as themselves, with their own cultures and governments? The question was unusual. Most primitive species asked about technology or protection. They wanted to know what they would gain from joining the Empire. Morrison seemed more interested in what they might lose. All member species benefit from Valorian guidance, the diplomatic officer responded. They receive structure, purpose, and security. That's not what I asked, Morrison said. I asked how many still exist as independent cultures. Zexthel felt a strange discomfort. The question was technically irrelevant. Conquered species became part of the Empire. They adopted Valorian customs, laws, and social structures. Their primitive cultures were replaced with superior Valorian civilization. This was progress, not destruction. The diplomatic officer delivered the standard ultimatum. The humans had 72 standard hours to respond. They could accept membership in the Empire or face military action. The choice was theirs. Morrison's response was immediate and unexpected. He requested a direct communication link to the highest-ranking human authority. Within minutes, a woman appeared on the communication screen. She introduced herself as Admiral Lisa Carter, representing something called the United Earth Defense. Commandant Carter was older than Morrison, with gray hair and sharp eyes. She listened to the ultimatum without showing fear or excitement. When the diplomatic officer finished speaking, she was quiet for a long moment. We appreciate the advance. Notice, Carter finally said. Her voice was calm, almost conversational. See you in 3 days. Before the diplomatic officer could respond, Carter ended the communication. The screen went dark, leaving the Valorian ship alone in space. Zexthel stared at the empty screen. In 847 previous conquests, no species had ever responded to the ultimatum with such casual dismissal. Most begged for more time. Others tried to negotiate. Some immediately surrendered. A few declared defiant resistance, but none had ever simply acknowledged the deadline and ended the conversation. Veltar looked confused. Sir, should we follow standard protocols? Begin positioning the fleet for invasion? Zexthel nodded slowly. Yes, standard invasion procedures. Deploy the fleet in standard formation. Prepare for orbital bombardment of military targets. Expect surrender within 18 hours of the first attack. As his officers began preparations, Zexthel made a note in his personal log. The human response had been unusual, but not concerning. Primitive species often reacted unpredictably when faced with superior technology. Some became paralyzed by fear. Others tried to appear brave. Carter's casual response was probably just another form of primitive bravado. Still, something about the interaction bothered him. Morrison's question about the fate of conquered species showed unusual thinking. Most primitives focused on immediate survival. They didn't consider long-term cultural implications. And Carter's response had been too calm, too prepared. Almost as if she had been expecting the ultimatum. Zexthel dismissed the thought. He had seen countless variations of primitive behavior. Fear took many forms. The humans would surrender once they witnessed Valorian military power. They always did. In 3 days. The humans would learn what 847 other species had already discovered. Resistance to the Valorian Empire was futile. Progress was inevitable. The conquest would proceed according to standard protocols. The humans would become the 848th success in Valorian military history. Zexthel had no reason to expect anything different. 3 days passed exactly as Admiral Carter had said. Zexthul watched from his command ship as the Valorian fleet moved into position around the human homeworld. 200 vessels surrounded the blue planet, their weapons powered and ready. The display of force was overwhelming. No primitive species had ever faced such military might. The orbital bombardment began at dawn over the largest human continent. Valorian energy beams struck military installations with surgical precision. Spaceports vanished in brilliant flashes. Defense satellites became expanding clouds of debris. Communication arrays went silent one by one. Within 6 hours, human orbital. Defenses were completely destroyed. Their primitive space force had been eliminated without firing a single effective shot. The planet lay defenseless under Valorian guns. Zexthul waited for the surrender transmission. Standard protocol dictated that defeated species would contact the invasion fleet within 12 hours of losing their orbital defenses. The humans had witnessed Valorian power. Logic demanded their immediate capitulation, but no transmission came. 12 hours passed, then 24. The human world remained silent. No diplomatic signals, no surrender offers, no communication of any kind. Every major population center continued its normal activities as if nothing had happened. Veltar approached the command station with obvious confusion. Sir, long-range sensors show normal civilian activity across all human settlements. Their transportation networks are functioning. Power grids remain active, but we are receiving no official communications. Zexthul studied the tactical displays. The silence was unprecedented. Defeated species always tried to negotiate. Fear drove them to contact their conquerors, seeking terms, begging for mercy, or attempting to buy time. The humans appeared to be ignoring the invasion entirely. Begin ground assault operations, Zexthul ordered. Deploy landing forces to secure major population centers. Standard occupation procedures. Colonel Ryan Phillips led the first ground assault against a human military installation. Intelligence reports indicated the base housed their primary command and control systems. Capturing it would cripple human resistance and force a surrender. Zexthul accompanied the landing party, expecting routine occupation procedures. The transport. Ships descended through the atmosphere without opposition. Human aircraft had been destroyed in the orbital bombardment. Surface-to-air defenses remained silent. The military base appeared abandoned from the air. No movement on the landing fields. No vehicles on the roads. No energy signatures from defensive systems. Phillips landed his forces in standard formation, preparing for immediate occupation. But as they advanced into the facility, Zexthul realized something was wrong. The base was not simply abandoned. It had been systematically destroyed from within. Every piece of useful equipment had been removed or rendered inoperable. Computer systems had been wiped clean and then physically destroyed. Weapons storage areas were empty. Vehicle maintenance bays contained only burned-out shells. Sir, check. This out, one of Philip's soldiers called from a communications center. The room was filled with destroyed equipment, but spray-painted on the wall in human writing were the words, "Welcome to Earth. Enjoy your stay." Phillips set up a perimeter and began searching for human survivors or prisoners. They found Dr. Amanda Foster in what had been the base medical facility. She was sitting calmly in an empty room, reading a book, apparently waiting for them. "Dr. Foster," Phillips said through his translator, "you are now under Valorian protection. We require information about your military command structure." Foster looked up from her book with mild interest. She was a middle-aged human with graying hair and steady eyes. She showed no fear of her captors. "There is no military command structure anymore," she said simply. "We dissolved it 3 days ago." Zexthul stepped forward. "Explain." Foster marked her place in the book and set it aside. When you gave us 72 hours notice, we used the time to prepare. We evacuated all essential personnel and equipment. We destroyed everything we couldn't move. We implemented what we call scorched earth protocols. You destroyed your own defenses? Veltar asked incredulously. We destroyed everything that might be useful to an occupying force, Foster corrected. Military bases, communication networks, transportation hubs, manufacturing facilities, power plants. If we couldn't take it with us, we made sure you couldn't use it either. Zexthil felt a chill run through his scales. No conquered species had ever deliberately destroyed their own infrastructure. The concept was beyond his understanding. But your population centers remain intact, he pointed out. Foster smiled. Yes, we're not trying to destroy ourselves. We're just making sure you can't use our resources against us. You wanted to conquer a functioning civilization. Instead, you'll be occupying empty buildings. The next phase of the invasion quickly confirmed Foster's words. Every military installation was empty and destroyed. Government buildings had been abandoned and stripped of all useful materials. Industrial facilities had been sabotaged beyond repair. Even civilian infrastructure like power plants and water treatment facilities had been shut down in an organized withdrawal. Steve Cooper demonstrated human tactical thinking when his unit was cornered near a human city. Valorian forces had surrounded Cooper's position with overwhelming firepower. Standard military doctrine called for immediate surrender to preserve lives. Instead, Cooper initiated what he called a fighting withdrawal. His soldiers didn't hold their ground or attempt to break through Valorian lines. They fought a running battle, inflicting maximum casualties while retreating through prepared positions. Every time Valorian forces advanced, they found empty trenches and booby traps. Cooper's force eventually escaped into the civilian population and vanished completely. They had turned a military defeat into a strategic victory by refusing to fight. According to established rules, Zexthil watched the tactical reports with growing unease. Human forces were not behaving like a defeated military. They were not attempting to hold territory or protect specific locations. Instead, they seemed focused on making Valorian occupation as difficult and expensive as possible. The breakthrough in understanding came when Private Nicole Hayes was wounded and captured during a patrol action. She was young, barely out of training, but she spoke to her captors with surprising confidence. You people really don't understand, do you? Hayes said when Zexthil questioned her. You keep expecting us to fight like you fight. Stand-up battles, defended positions, formal surrenders. That's not how humans do war. Explain, Zexthil demanded. Hayes shifted to a more comfortable position despite her injuries. You said you've conquered 847 worlds. We've been fighting each other for 10,000 years. Every dirty trick, every desperate strategy, every impossible victory. We've done it all to ourselves first. She looked directly at Zexthil with steady eyes. You have experience conquering. We have experience with war. Real war. The kind where losing means your entire species disappears forever. Zexthil stared at the young human soldier. Her words carried implications that challenged everything he understood about military operations. Valorian conquest was clean and efficient. Superior technology overwhelmed primitive defenses. Logic forced reasonable surrender terms. But Hayes was describing something different. Not conquest, but survival warfare. Not civilized military action, but species-level conflict where any tactic was acceptable if it prevented extinction. Your military doctrine assumes rational opponents, Hayes continued. You expect us to weigh costs and benefits, to surrender when continued resistance becomes illogical. But we're not rational about survival. We're desperate. As if to prove her point, Intelligence reports began arriving from across the human world. Valorian occupation forces were facing constant harassment from invisible enemies. Supply convoys were ambushed by attackers who vanished immediately afterward. Communication. Lines were sabotaged nightly. Isolated patrols simply disappeared without trace. The humans were not fighting a conventional war. They were fighting a war of attrition, designed to make Valorian occupation unbearable. Every day brought new casualties, new problems, new complications. Zex Thill realized with growing horror that the humans had never intended to defeat the Valorian fleet in open battle. They had planned from the beginning to make conquest so costly that the Valorians would eventually leave. The humans were not trying to win. They were trying to survive. And in the process, they were teaching Zexthul that there was a difference between conquest and war that he had never understood before. The war entered its second month with no end in sight. Zexthul stared at casualty reports that made no sense according to Valorian military doctrine. His forces controlled every major city, every strategic location, every transportation hub on the human world. Yet somehow they were losing. Captain Derek Johnson changed everything when he led the first human counterattack in space. Zexthul watched in disbelief as a small human craft approached one of his patrol vessels. Standard procedure called for the human ship to be destroyed immediately, but Johnson had painted surrender symbols on his hull and transmitted a white flag signal. The Valorian commander followed military protocol and allowed the damaged human vessel to dock. Johnson and his crew came aboard as apparent prisoners of war. They were searched, disarmed, and placed in the ship's detention center according to proper procedure. 6 hours later, the Valorian patrol ship went dark. Johnson had not come to surrender. He had come to capture a Valorian vessel from the inside. Instead of targeting the bridge or weapon systems like normal tactics suggested, the humans had focused on life support and gravity systems. They turned the ship's own technology against the crew. Within hours, Johnson was broadcasting from the captured Valorian ship. He spoke directly to the human population on the planet below, his voice calm and confident. "This is Captain Derek Johnson of the captured vessel Thunderstrike. We now have Valorian technology, Valorian weapons, and detailed intelligence on Valorian fleet positions. The liberation of Earth has begun." Zexthul felt something he had never experienced before. Fear. Not fear of death in battle, which was honorable, but fear of an enemy that refused to follow any rules he understood. Johnson had violated every principle of civilized warfare by using false surrender to capture a military vessel. But worse was coming. Engineer Tony Martinez began demonstrating what humans called adaptive warfare. Within days of Johnson's capture, human forces were using modified Valorian energy weapons. They had somehow reverse-engineered advanced technology in less than a week. Martinez's innovations were crude but effective. Human soldiers began carrying energy rifles that used Valorian power cells. Their improvised vehicles mounted Valorian shield generators. Most disturbing of all, they were improving the technology as they used it. How is this possible? Veltar asked as he studied intelligence reports. Valorian technology is centuries ahead of human science. They should not be able to understand our systems, let alone modify them. Dr. Foster, who remained in custody, provided the answer during one of her regular interrogations. She had become strangely cooperative, answering questions with the attitude of a teacher, explaining simple concepts to slow students. "You assume that advanced technology is more complex," she said. "But complexity and advancement are different things. Your energy weapons are very advanced, but they are also simpler than our chemical weapons. Fewer moving parts. More direct energy transfer. Easier to modify once you understand the basic principles." Zexthul struggled to process this information. "But your species lacks the scientific foundation," to understand our technology. Foster smiled. No, we lack your specific technological path. We developed different solutions to the same problems. When we see your solutions, we can combine them with our approaches. The result is often better than either original design. This was impossible according to Valorian understanding. Primitive species could not simply steal and improve advanced technology. It took centuries of scientific development to build the knowledge base needed for such innovations, yet the evidence was undeniable. Human forces were not only using Valorian technology, but making it more effective. Their modified weapons had longer range. Their improvised shields were more efficient. Their captured ships were being operated by crews that had never seen Valorian technology before the invasion began. Then Sergeant Katie Sullivan launched the psychological warfare campaign that broke Valorian morale completely. Sullivan's first broadcast reached every Valorian communication device simultaneously. She had somehow accessed their command frequencies and overridden all security protocols. When she appeared on screens throughout the fleet, Zexthil expected the usual human propaganda about resistance and freedom. Instead, Sullivan simply began reading names. Commander Hixvar of the Valorian Fourth Fleet, born on Kepler Prime, survived by 3 offspring and 1 bonded mate. Lieutenant Zeltoth of the Engineering Corps, from the colony world New Harmony, had just celebrated his promotion before the invasion began. She continued for hours, reading the names of every Valorian soldier killed since the invasion began. Not just their names, but details about their lives, their families, their home worlds. Information that should have been impossible for humans to obtain. Specialist Kunara of the Medical Division, age 47 standard years, collected ancient poetry and planned to retire to the artistic colonies after completing her service. The broadcast ended with Sullivan looking directly into the camera. Her voice remained calm and conversational throughout. "We remember everyone," she said, "every single individual who has died in this war. We know their names, their stories, their dreams. We will remember them long after this war ends. The question is, do you?" The psychological impact was devastating. Valorian soldiers had been trained to see humans as primitive enemies to be conquered. Sullivan's broadcast forced them to confront the fact that the humans saw them as individuals with lives and families worth remembering, but the message carried a deeper threat. If humans could obtain such detailed personal information about Valorian casualties, what else did they know? How deep was their intelligence network? How much had they learned about Valorian society, culture, and weaknesses? The Battle of New Geneva demonstrated the final evolution of human tactics. Colonel Ben Martinez faced overwhelming Valorian forces in what should have been a decisive engagement. Zexthol deployed 3 full battle groups to crush the last organized human resistance. In the region, Martinez did not attempt to hold ground or retreat to defensive positions. Instead, he implemented what he called tactical dissolution. His entire army simply vanished. One moment, Valorian forces were facing organized military units with clear command structures and defensive positions. The next moment, they were occupying empty terrain while facing attacks from invisible enemies who could be anywhere. Martinez had dissolved his formal military structure and integrated his soldiers into the civilian population. They continued fighting, but now they were indistinguishable from ordinary humans. Every civilian could be a soldier. Every building could hide weapons. Every friendly face could conceal an enemy. Dr. Rachel Stevens, a human military psychologist, who had been captured during the battle, explained the strategy to Zexthil during her interrogation. "You are not fighting our military anymore," she said. "You are fighting our culture. Every human civilian is now a potential combatant. Every human settlement is now a military target. You cannot win this war without destroying our entire species. Stevens leaned forward, her eyes intense. "And if you do that, you will prove to every species in the galaxy that joining your empire means eventual extinction. You will have destroyed your own system of conquest." Zexthel stared at the human psychologist. She had identified the central problem that was keeping him awake during rest periods. The humans had forced the Valorians into an impossible situation. Traditional conquest required demonstrating superior power while offering reasonable terms for surrender. The humans had made surrender impossible by refusing to maintain the formal command structures needed for negotiation. They had made traditional victory impossible by integrating military resistance into civilian populations. The only way to win the war was to kill every human on the planet. But doing so would destroy the Valorian Empire's entire system of expansion. No species would willingly join an empire that committed genocide against those who resisted. Zexthel realized that the humans had not just broken Valorian military doctrine. They had broken the fundamental logic that made Valorian civilization possible. They had turned the Empire's greatest strength into its greatest weakness. For the first time in his long military career, Zexthel began to understand that victory and defeat might not be the only possible outcomes of warfare. The humans were teaching him that some conflicts could not be won or lost, only endured. And endurance, he was learning, was a human specialty. The war had lasted 1 full year when Admiral Charles Brooks launched Operation Homecoming. Zexthel first learned about it when his homeworld sent an emergency transmission. Human ships had appeared in Valorian space, thousands of light years. From Earth, the message was brief and terrifying. Unknown vessels using modified Valorian technology have attacked our outer colonies. They are not attempting conquest. They are demonstrating capability. Request immediate fleet recall for home. Defense. Zexthel stared at the communication with growing horror. The humans had somehow developed faster-than-light travel using captured Valorian technology. But more importantly, they were not using it to attack Valorian worlds. They were using it to prove that distance provided no safety from human retaliation. Lieutenant. Commander Patricia Kim revealed the true scope of human psychological operations when she began broadcasting to Valorian colonies throughout the Empire. Kim did not threaten destruction or demand surrender. Instead, she offered something unprecedented: freedom. Citizens of the Valorian Empire, Kim's voice reached every communication device in Valorian space. "We are humans from Earth. We know. Many of you are conquered by the Valorians, just as they are trying to conquer us. We offer you a choice they never gave you: independence." The message continued with detailed information about Valorian military weaknesses, locations of key installations, and instructions for organizing resistance movements. But the most damaging part was Kim's offer of human protection for any species that chose to rebel against Valorian rule. "We will not conquer you," Kim promised. "We will not rule you. We will simply help you rule yourselves. Send a message to these coordinates if you want to be free." Within days, rebellions began erupting across the Valorian Empire. Species that had been conquered decades or centuries earlier suddenly had hope that independence was possible. Worse, they had detailed intelligence about Valorian vulnerabilities and human allies willing to provide support. Zexthel watched his civilization begin to collapse from the inside. The Empire had been built on the assumption that conquered species would remain conquered. The humans had shattered that assumption by proving that liberation was possible. The final blow came when Colonel Alex Turner requested a meeting with Valorian leadership. Not a surrender negotiation or a peace treaty, but a simple diplomatic meeting. Turner traveled alone to the Valorian command ship, carrying only a small data device. Zexthel met with Turner in the ship's conference room. The human colonel was middle-aged and calm, showing no fear despite being surrounded by his enemies. He placed the data device on the table and activated it. This contains the complete technical specifications for a weapon that can destroy entire star systems, Turner said without preamble. We developed it 6 months ago using principles we learned from your technology. Zexthul felt his blood turn. Cold. You are threatening to use this weapon? Turner shook his head. No, we are giving it to you. The data device projected detailed schematics of a weapon that could destabilize stars and cause them to collapse into black holes. The technology was theoretically possible using advanced Valorian science, but the humans had somehow made it practical. We could have used this weapon to destroy every Valorian world, Turner continued. We chose not to. Instead, we are sharing the technology with you as a gesture of good faith. Zexthul stared at the weapon designs. I do not understand. Turner smiled. We did not fight this war to destroy you. We fought it to make sure you understood we could not be destroyed. There is a difference. The colonel stood and walked to the conference room window, looking out at the stars. Your empire is based on the idea that superior technology allows you to conquer inferior species. We have proven that idea wrong. We have shown that any species, no matter how primitive, can become a threat if they are desperate enough. Turner turned back to face Zexthul. But we have also shown that desperate species can become allies if they are treated with respect. We are offering you partnership instead of conquest, trade instead of tribute, mutual defense instead of imperial, expansion. General Monica Clark arrived the next day with a full diplomatic team. She delivered the final terms of what humans called the Earth Accords. The Valorian Empire would end its policy of forced expansion. Conquered species would be offered independence and support for self-governance. Valorian and human forces would work together to maintain peace and security in the galaxy. You have a choice, Clark explained to the assembled Valorian leadership. You can continue trying to conquer the galaxy until every species becomes as desperate as we were. Eventually, one of them will find a way to destroy you completely. Or you can help us build something better. Clark activated a holographic display showing the current state of the galaxy. Red areas indicated active rebellions against Valorian rule. Yellow areas showed species considering independence. Green areas represented worlds already liberated by human forces. Your empire is collapsing, Clark stated matter-of-factly. We accelerated the process, but it was inevitable. Forced rule cannot last forever. We are offering you a chance to be part of the solution instead of part of the problem. The negotiations lasted 3 days. Zexthul participated as a military advisor, but he found himself unable to focus on the details. His mind kept returning to the fundamental question that had been bothering him since the war began. How had 8 billion humans defeated an empire that had conquered 847 worlds? Dr. Foster, who had been released as part of the preliminary agreements, provided the answer during a private conversation. You never fought 847 wars, she explained. You fought 847 conquests. There is a difference. Conquest is about overwhelming force applied quickly. War is about survival applied over time. Foster looked directly at Zexthul with the same steady gaze she had maintained throughout her captivity. We have been fighting wars for our entire species' history, not conquests, not expansions, wars, life or death struggles where losing meant extinction. She paused, allowing the words to sink in. When you gave us 3 days' notice of invasion, you gave us time to prepare for war. Real war, the kind where everything is acceptable because the alternative is death. Zexthul finally understood. The Valorians had military excellence, but the humans had military desperation. They had faced extinction so many times in their history that it had become their natural state. They did not fight to win. They fought to survive and survival, Sexthel realized, was a much stronger motivation than conquest. The Earth Accords were signed 1 year and 18 days after the invasion began. The Valorian Empire officially ended its expansion policy and began the process of granting independence to member species. Human and Valorian forces formed joint peacekeeping units to maintain stability during the transition. Sexthel accepted a position as liaison officer in the new Human-Valorian alliance. His job was to help other species understand the change from imperial expansion to cooperative partnership. It was challenging work, but he found it more rewarding than conquest had ever been. Years later, when young officers asked him about the human war, Sexthel would always give the same answer. "They did not fight to destroy us," he would say. "They fought to make sure we understood we could not destroy them. They turned our enemies into allies by proving that cooperation was stronger than conquest." Then he would add the warning that had become his signature statement: "Humans do not fight wars to win. They fight wars to ensure no one ever has to fight them again. That is not warfare. That is something much more terrifying. That is hope." The young officers never understood what he meant until they met humans themselves. Then they learned what Sexthel had learned during the longest year of his life. Human warfare had not just broken Valorian military doctrine. It had broken the idea that strength came from domination. The humans had proven that true strength came from turning enemies into friends. That realization, Sexthel knew, had changed him forever. It had broken his old understanding of power and war and victory. In its place, the humans had given him something he had never imagined possible. They had given him peace.